Welcome, kind listener, to this peaceful haven of history. This is a place where stories flow like a gentle river, carrying us far away from the rush of the present. Whether you are lying in bed, eyes growing heavy, or sitting quietly as the evening settles, know that you are among friends here. If you'd like, share in the comments where you are listening from. I treasure the chance to see how history brings together people from every corner of the world. And if these calm journeys speak to you, go ahead and subscribe, so our paths may cross again in the chapters to come. But for now, let the noise of today drift away, and join me as we wander softly into the mists of the past. Tonight, we journey to a place where the jungle breathes with memory, where stone pyramids rise through morning fog like prayers made solid, where the very earth remembers the footsteps of astronomers and kings. We are going to walk together through the story of the Maya, a civilization that flourished in the green heart of Mesoamerica for more than 3,000 years. Their world was one of jade and obsidian, of chocolate and maize, of cities that touched the clouds and writing that captured time itself. This is not a story of sudden beginnings or simple endings. It is a story that unfolds slowly, like the petals of a night-blooming flower, revealing layer after layer of human achievement, struggle, beauty, and endurance. Let us begin not with dates or dynasties, but with a landscape. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the lowlands of what we now call Guatemala, Belize, and the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. Picture dense rainforests stretching in every direction, canopies so thick that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. Howler monkeys call from the branches, their voices echoing like distant thunder. Jaguars move through the undergrowth with liquid grace, their spotted coats flickering between shadow and light. Rivers wind through the limestone terrain, sometimes disappearing underground into vast cave systems that the Maya would come to see as portals to the underworld itself. In the dry season, the land is dusty and thirsty. In the rainy season, water falls in sheets, transforming everything into shimmering green abundance. This is the world that cradled Maya civilization, a world that was both generous and demanding, that gave freely of its riches but required constant attention, constant negotiation, constant respect. The Maya did not emerge suddenly from nowhere, fully formed like a figure stepping out of myth. Their story begins quietly, gradually, in the deep reaches of what archaeologists call the Archaic period, perhaps as early as 7,000 or 8,000 years before the present era. In those distant times, small groups of people moved through the forests and along the coasts, hunting game, gathering wild plants, learning the rhythms of the seasons and the habits of the animals. They were our ancestors in the most profound sense, people who looked up at the same stars we see, who wondered about the same mysteries, who loved their children and mourned their dead and tried to make sense of the great turning wheel of existence. Somewhere around 2,000 years before the Common Era, these wandering peoples began to settle more permanently in villages. They learned to cultivate maize, that miraculous grain that would become the very foundation of Maya life. Maize was not merely food to the Maya. It was sacred, a gift from the gods, the substance from which humanity itself was formed according to their creation stories. The cultivation of maize transformed everything. It allowed populations to grow. It created surplus that could support specialists, people who did not spend all their time securing food but could instead devote themselves to craft, to building, to observing the heavens, to recording knowledge. From these small farming villages, slowly, patiently, over centuries, Maya civilization began to take shape. By the time we reach what scholars call the preclassic or formative period, beginning around 2,000 years before the Common Era and lasting until roughly 250 years into the Common Era, we can already see the distinctive features of Maya culture emerging. Communities were growing larger, more complex. People were building permanent structures, first simple houses of wood and thatch, then gradually more elaborate buildings of stone. They were making pottery, beautiful vessels decorated with red and orange designs. They were shaping jade into ornaments and tools, that precious green stone that they valued more than gold. They were beginning to develop the systems of writing, mathematics, and astronomical observation that would eventually become some of the most sophisticated in the ancient world. One of the earliest great centers of this emerging Maya world was a place called Nakbi, located in the Petén region of what is now northern Guatemala. Walking through the ruins of Nakbi today, even in their weathered and overgrown state, you can still sense the ambition of those early builders. They constructed massive platforms and pyramids, some rising more than 40 meters above the forest floor. Imagine the labor required to build such structures without metal tools, without wheels, without beasts of burden. Imagine the organization needed to feed and coordinate hundreds or thousands of workers. Imagine the vision that could conceive of such monuments in the first place. These were not simple farmers anymore. This was a civilization discovering its own potential, reaching upward towards something transcendent. Not far from Nakbi, another early city was taking shape, a place called El Mirador. If Nakbi was impressive, El Mirador was astonishing. This city, flourishing in the late preclassic period, may have been home to as many as 100,000 people. Its pyramids are among the largest ever built in the Maya world. The La Danta complex, a massive collection of platforms and temples, has a total volume greater than many Egyptian pyramids. Standing at the top of La Danta, you would have looked out over a city that stretched to the horizon, a city of plastered buildings painted in brilliant reds and whites, of marketplaces filled with goods from distant regions, of people going about their daily lives in a metropolitan center that rivaled anything else on Earth at that time. The scale of El Mirador tells us that Maya civilization was already mature and sophisticated more than 2,000 years ago, long before its most famous phase. These early Maya were already engaging in the complex trade networks that would become one of their civilization's defining characteristics. Obsidian from the highlands of Guatemala, the volcanic glass that could be worked into razor-sharp blades, found its way to lowland cities. Jade from the Motagua Valley, that stone of the gods, traveled along trade routes to be fashioned into jewelry and ritual objects. Cacao beans from the humid lowlands moved to the drier regions where they could not be grown. Shells from the distant coasts became ornaments and musical instruments. The Maya world was never isolated. It was connected, networked, interdependent. As we move gently forward through time, we arrive at what historians call the Classic Period, generally dated from about 250 to 900 years into the Common Era. This is often considered the golden age of Maya civilization, the era when their cities were most populous, their art most refined, their intellectual achievements most impressive. But let us not think of it as a single, unified empire. The Maya never created a centralized state like Rome or the Aztec Empire that would later rise in central Mexico. Instead, their world was a complex mosaic of city-states, each with its own ruling dynasty, its own patron deities, its own character and concerns. These cities competed with one another, formed alliances that rose and fell, traded and fought and intermarried, creating a political landscape of extraordinary complexity and dynamism. Consider Tikal, perhaps the most famous of all Maya cities. Located deep in the rainforests of Guatemala, Tikal at its height was home to perhaps 60,000 people, with tens of thousands more living in the surrounding countryside. Its great pyramids, particularly Temple 4, rose more than 60 meters above the forest floor, tall enough that from their summits, priests and rulers could look out over the green canopy to see the temple tops of rival cities on the horizon. Walking through Tikal's central plaza in its glory days, you would have been surrounded by stone buildings covered in brilliant white plaster. The walls would have been painted with murals showing gods and ancestors, battles and rituals. Steely, tall stone monuments covered with carved hieroglyphs and portraits of rulers would have stood like sentinels, proclaiming the achievements and legitimacy of the dynasty. The air would have been thick with the smell of copal incense, that sacred resin that the Maya burned to communicate with the divine realm. You would have heard the sounds of the marketplace, people speaking a dozen different dialects, merchants calling out their wares, the rhythmic sound of women grinding maize on stone metates, children playing, dogs barking, drums beating for ceremonies in the temples above. Tikal's power waxed and waned over the centuries, rising and falling in a pattern that reflected the complex dynamics of Maya politics. The city reached an early peak of power in the 4th century under a ruler named Chuktokichok, whose name means Great Burning Claw. But in the year 378, something dramatic happened. A force from Teotihuacan, that great metropolis of central Mexico, arrived at Tikal. Whether this was a conquest, an alliance, or something more complicated remains debated by scholars, but the result was clear. Tikal's ruling dynasty was transformed, infused with foreign ideas and iconography. For more than a century afterward, Tikal's rulers depicted themselves with symbols and regalia borrowed from Teotihuacan, blending Maya and Mexican traditions into something new. Yet Tikal was not the only great power in the Maya lowlands. To the northwest lay Calakmul, Tikal's great rival, the eternal competitor for dominance in the region. The conflict between these two superpowers shaped Maya history for centuries, like the Cold War rivalry between the United States and Soviet Union shaped the 20th century world. Calakmul built a network of alliances with smaller cities, creating what scholars call the Snake Kingdom, named after the serpent head emblem that appeared in Calakmul's royal titles. Tikal too had its allies and client states. The great cities maneuvered, negotiated, fought proxy wars through their allied smaller kingdoms. The stakes were high: control of trade routes, tribute from subjugated cities, and something even more important, the supernatural power and prestige that came with military and political success. The Maya believed that their rulers were not merely political leaders but sacred beings who mediated between the human and divine realms. Victory in war was proof of divine favor. Defeat could undermine a dynasty's very claim to rule. In the year 562, Calakmul achieved a stunning victory over Tikal, capturing and apparently sacrificing Tikal's ruler, a king named Wakchan. This marked the beginning of what scholars call Tikal's hiatus, a period of more than a century when the city erected no monuments and seems to have been politically subordinate to its rivals. Imagine what this meant for the people of Tikal, to see their proud city humbled, their monuments defaced, their kings made subordinate to foreign powers. Yet civilizations, like individuals, can recover from trauma and defeat. Under a ruler named Wakchan, who came to power in the year 682, Tikal began its revival. In 695, Wakchan achieved a great victory over Calakmul, capturing one of its most important lords. The tide had turned. Tikal entered a new golden age, building the magnificent Temple I and Temple II that still dominate its central plaza today. The struggle between great powers continued, but Tikal was ascendant once more. While these great cities dominated the political landscape, life in Maya communities followed rhythms that had changed little over centuries. Most Maya were farmers, living in small villages or scattered homesteads near the great cities. They rose before dawn to begin their daily tasks. Women would grind maize into flour on stone grinding stones called metates, a task that could take hours each day, their hands moving in that ancient circular motion that their mothers and grandmothers had taught them. They would pat the maize dough into tortillas or wrap it in leaves to make tamales. They would tend to the household, care for children, weave cotton into cloth on backstrap looms, patterns emerging from their fingers that carried meanings passed down through generations. Men would head to the fields, the milpas, where they cultivated maize, beans, squash, and a host of other crops. Maya agriculture was sophisticated, adapted over millennia to the specific conditions of the tropical lowlands. Farmers practiced a form of shifting cultivation, clearing and burning sections of forest to create fields that would be fertile for a few years before the soil was exhausted. They would then allow the forest to reclaim these areas while they cleared new fields elsewhere, creating a rotating system that could be sustainable if populations did not grow too large. They also built raised fields in swampy areas, creating artificial islands of rich soil that could produce abundant harvests. They managed forest gardens, cultivating useful trees alongside annual crops, creating what ecologists today would call agroforestry systems. The milpa was never just one crop. The Maya understood what modern scientists call companion planting. Maize stalks provided support for climbing bean vines. Beans, being legumes, fixed nitrogen in the soil, fertilizing the maize. Squash grew beneath the other plants, its broad leaves shading the ground and preventing weeds. Together, these three sisters, as they are sometimes called, provided a balanced diet and supported each other's growth. Beyond these staples, the Maya cultivated chili peppers to add fire to their food, tomatoes, avocados, cacao, cotton, tobacco, and dozens of other plants. The milpa was not merely a field. It was an ecosystem carefully constructed by human hands, a dialogue between people and nature that had been refined over thousands of years. After the day's labor, families would gather in the evenings. They would eat together, the day's harvest prepared into the familiar foods that sustained life. They would tell stories, passing down the myths and histories of their people. They would teach their children the skills they would need, boys learning farming and hunting from their fathers and uncles, girls learning cooking and weaving from their mothers and aunts. On special occasions, they would participate in community rituals, ceremonies that marked the cycles of the agricultural year, the transitions of human life, the relationship between humans and the gods who controlled rain and sun, harvest and drought. The Maya cosmos was alive with spirits and deities. The world was not divided sharply between the sacred and profane as it might be in modern Western thought. Everything had its spiritual dimension. The gods were present in rain clouds and lightning bolts, in the maize that grew in the fields, in the caves that opened into the underworld, in the movements of the planets across the night sky. The Maya recognized a vast pantheon of deities, each with their own personality, preferences, and domains. There was Itzamna, the aged creator god associated with writing and learning. There was Kinichajah, the sun god who traveled across the sky by day and through the underworld by night in an eternal cycle of death and rebirth. There was Chak, the rain god, so important in a land where the dry season could extend for months and where the success or failure of crops depended on the rains arriving at the right time. There was Nine Chel, goddess of the moon and childbirth. There were the hero twins, Hunahpu and Spelunk, whose adventures in the underworld were recorded in the sacred book of the Popol Vuh and who represented the victory of life and light over death and darkness. Communication with these deities was essential, and the Maya developed elaborate rituals to maintain cosmic balance. Bloodletting was one of the most important. Rulers and nobles would pierce their tongues, earlobes, or genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades, allowing their sacred blood to flow onto bark paper. They would burn this paper, sending the blood smoke spiraling up to the heavens, a direct offering to the gods. This was not seen as barbaric or painful in the way modern observers might view it. It was seen as necessary, beautiful even, a supreme act of piety and responsibility. The Maya believed that the gods had sacrificed their own blood to create humanity, and humans owed a debt that could only be repaid through reciprocal sacrifice. Human sacrifice also occurred, though perhaps not as frequently as Spanish chroniclers and modern popular culture might suggest. Captives taken in war, particularly high-ranking nobles, were sometimes sacrificed, often by beheading or hard extraction. These were not casual acts of cruelty but sacred rituals performed at specific times and places according to precise protocols. The victims were not seen as mere prisoners but as sacred offerings, often dressed and treated as embodiments of specific deities before their deaths. Through their sacrifice, they facilitated communication between the earthly and divine realms, ensuring the continuation of the cosmic cycles that kept the universe in motion. The Maya were consummate observers of the sky. On clear nights, far from modern light pollution, the stars blaze with an intensity difficult to imagine today. The Maya watched these stars night after night, generation after generation, and they discerned patterns. They tracked the movements of Venus, that brilliant morning and evening star, and discovered that its cycles could be predicted with remarkable precision. They observed the moon's phases and learned to predict eclipses. They charted the path of the sun through the constellations and marked the solstices and equinoxes. They identified what we call planets, wandering stars that moved against the fixed background of the constellations. From these observations, the Maya developed mathematical and astronomical knowledge of extraordinary sophistication. They created a vigesimal counting system, based on 20 rather than our familiar base 10, and they invented a symbol for zero, a concept that was developed independently in only a few places in human history. This zero was not merely a placeholder but a number in its own right, representing completion and potentiality. With their mathematical tools, Maya astronomers calculated the length of the solar year to be 365.2420 days, astonishingly close to the modern calculation of 365.2422 days. They calculated the synodic period of Venus, the time it takes for Venus to return to the same position relative to Earth and the Sun, as 584 days, again remarkably accurate. These calculations were not academic exercises. They had profound religious and political significance. The Maya believed that time was cyclical, that patterns repeated, that by understanding the movements of the heavens, one could predict and prepare for what was to come. They developed several interlocking calendars. The Tzolk'in was a sacred calendar of 260 days, formed by the combination of 13 numbers with 20-day names. Every day had its own character, its own omens and associations. Children were often named for the day on which they were born, and these names carried implications about their personality and destiny. The Hab was a solar calendar of 365 days, divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus a short period of 5 unlucky days at the end. The Tzolk'in and Hab meshed together like gears, creating a longer cycle called the calendar round of 52 years, after which the same combination of Tzolk'in and Hab dates would recur. But the Maya were not satisfied with these cycles alone. They developed an even longer calendar, the long count, which counted days from a mythical creation date. This creation date, when translated into our calendar system, corresponds to August 11th, 3114 before the Common Era, though the Maya themselves would have thought of it differently. The long count allowed the Maya to record dates across vast stretches of time, to place historical events in an absolute chronology. It was divided into various units, kin for days, unals for periods of 20 days, tons for 360 days, kaetans for 20 tons, and backtons for 20 kaetans. The completion of each of these cycles was significant, marked by ceremonies and the erection of monuments. The end of a backton, a period of roughly 400 years, was an especially momentous occasion. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood aspects of Maya culture, the so-called Maya prophecy of 2012. Some modern interpreters, perhaps motivated by New Age spirituality or commercial interests, claimed that the Maya predicted the end of the world on December 21, 2012. This was a fundamental misunderstanding. What occurred on that date was simply the completion of the 13th backton since the creation date in the long count calendar. It was significant, yes, but it marked a completion and a new beginning, not an apocalypse. It was analogous to the way we might celebrate the beginning of a new millennium or a new century, a moment for reflection and renewal, not destruction. Maya scholars and contemporary Maya people repeatedly pointed this out, but the allure of apocalyptic prophecy proved difficult to overcome in popular culture. The Maya recorded their sophisticated knowledge in one of the most remarkable writing systems ever developed, a complete script capable of expressing any thought that could be spoken in Maya languages. Their writing used both logograms, symbols that represented whole words, and syllabic signs that represented sounds. This flexibility meant that the same word could often be written in multiple ways, using different combinations of logographic and syllabic elements. Maya scribes were artists as well as writers, and their glyphs are beautiful, intricate designs that often incorporate faces and full figures. Many glyphs seem almost alive, staring out from the stone or paper with large eyes and expressive features. For centuries after the Spanish conquest, this writing system remained undeciphered, its secrets locked away, the voices of the ancient Maya silenced. Colonial authorities, particularly Diego de Landa, the Franciscan bishop of Yucatan, systematically destroyed Maya books, seeing them as works of the devil. In 1562, at the town of Mani, de Landa presided over an auto de fe in which thousands of Maya manuscripts were burned. Only 4 books, called codices, survived to the present. These are the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, and the recently authenticated Grolier Codex. Each is a treasure beyond price, folding screen books made of bark paper coated with lime plaster, covered with hieroglyphic writing and images in red, blue, black, and yellow pigments. They contain astronomical tables, ritual almanacs, information about ceremonies and divination. But they represent only a fraction of what once existed. Imagine if only 4 books had survived from all of ancient Greece or Rome. That is the scale of loss we are considering. The breakthrough in deciphering Maya writing came slowly, painstakingly, over the course of the 20th century. Scholars like Yuri Norizov, Tatiana Proskuryakov, and David Stewart, among many others, gradually unlocked the code, recognizing that the glyphs represented actual language, not just abstract symbols. Proskuryakov made a crucial discovery when she realized that the dates and figures on Maya monuments recorded actual historical events, the births, accessions, marriages, and deaths of real rulers, not mythological or astronomical information. Suddenly, the stones began to speak. Dynasties emerged from anonymity. Rulers who had been forgotten for more than 1,000 years had their names and deeds restored to memory. Cities that had been identified only by archaeological site numbers could be called by the names their inhabitants had used. The ancient Maya became not just a prehistoric civilization but a historical culture with individuals, personalities, conflicts, and achievements we could know and understand. As we learn these names and stories, the Maya world becomes more vivid, more real. At Copan, located in what is now Honduras, a dynasty of 16 rulers shaped the city over 4 centuries. The most famous was Kinichaks Kuk Mo, who founded the dynasty around the year 426. His tomb was discovered deep beneath the Acropolis, the great complex of temples and palaces at the city's heart. Analysis of his remains revealed that he had come from somewhere else, probably the Petan lowlands far to the north, and that he had sustained serious injuries in combat. He was a warrior king who established his rule through military prowess and then legitimized it through ritual and monument building. His successors venerated him for centuries, building temples over his tomb, performing rituals to honor his spirit, claiming descent from him to justify their own rule. The 13th ruler of Copan, known as 18 Rabbit or Waxaclajuan Abakawil in Maya, presided over the city's artistic golden age in the early 8th century. During his reign, Copan sculptors created some of the finest stone carvings in Maya art. The stelae he erected are masterpieces, portraits of the king in full regalia so detailed and three-dimensional that they seem almost to step out of the stone. The hieroglyphic stairway, decorated with more than 2,000 glyphs, the longest Maya text carved in stone, was begun during his reign. Copan's ball court, where the ritual Mesoamerican ballgame was played, reached its final elaborate form. The city was at its peak, prosperous, powerful, confident. But pride, as the Greeks knew well, often precedes a fall. In 738, 18 Rabbit was captured in battle by Kak Tiliachan Yopat, the ruler of Quirigua, a smaller city that had long been subordinate to Copan. 18 was taken to Quirigua and beheaded, a stunning reversal of fortune. The humiliation was profound. Copan did not erect monuments for 17 years after this catastrophe. When monument building resumed, the new ruler, Kak Yipiaj Chankawil, known as Smoke Shell, faced the challenge of rebuilding not just buildings but confidence, legitimacy, and pride. He did so in part by creating one of the most remarkable structures in the Maya world, Temple 22, covered with elaborate cosmic imagery showing the mountain of creation, the tree of life connecting the underworld, earth, and heavens, and the ruler himself positioned at the center of this cosmic architecture, the axis mundi connecting all realms. Far to the north, in the Yucatan Peninsula, a different pattern of Maya civilization was developing. The northern lowlands were drier than the southern regions where cities like Tikal and Copan flourished. Surface water was scarce. Rivers did not flow above ground. Instead, the porous limestone bedrock was riddled with underground rivers and cenotes, natural sinkholes that opened into the aquifer below. These cenotes were not just water sources. They were sacred places, portals to Xibalba, the underworld, dwelling place of gods and ancestors. The Maya threw offerings into their depths, jade, pottery, incense, and sometimes, in times of great crisis or during particularly important ceremonies, human victims. Cities in the northern lowlands developed architectural styles that differed from their southern counterparts. Buildings featured the Puke style, characterized by precisely cut limestone facing stones, intricate geometric mosaics decorating upper facades, and an overall elegance that some consider the highest achievement of Maya architecture. Uxmal, one of the great cities of this region, displays this style magnificently. The Pyramid of the Magician rises in rounded terraces rather than the steep rectangular pyramids common elsewhere. The governor's palace, stretching more than 90 meters in length, features a facade decorated with thousands of individually carved stones creating elaborate patterns, including masks of Chak, the rain god, so crucial in this dry land. The nunnery quadrangle, for buildings arranged around a courtyard, displays some of the finest examples of Puke decoration, entire walls covered with stone mosaics depicting serpents, gods, houses, lattices, and abstract designs whose meanings we can only partly decipher. The northern cities were also notable for their extensive trade connections. They were closer to the salt beds of the northern coast and to the coastal trade routes that connected the Maya world with central Mexico. Goods and ideas flowed along these routes. The northern Maya were particularly influenced by cultures from central Mexico, especially in the later Classic and post-Classic periods. This influence would reach its peak at a place called Chichen Itza, but before we arrive there, we must pause to consider one of the great mysteries of Maya history, the classic Maya collapse. As the 9th century progressed, something went wrong in the southern Maya lowlands. One by one, the great cities stopped erecting dated monuments. Dynasties that had ruled for centuries simply vanished from the historical record. Population levels plummeted. People abandoned cities that had been inhabited for more than 1,000 years. Within the span of perhaps a century, Maya civilization in the southern lowlands underwent a demographic and political catastrophe. The cities did not vanish overnight. The people did not disappear. But the elaborate court life, the monument building, the complex political structures, the dense populations, all these declined precipitously. The jungle began to reclaim the plazas and temples. Roots worked their way into cracks in the plaster. Vines climbed the pyramid sides. Trees grew from the roofs of palaces. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, many of the greatest cities of the Classic period were completely overgrown, their very existence forgotten. What caused this collapse? Scholars have debated this question for decades, proposing numerous theories. Environmental degradation seems to have played a role. Centuries of intensive agriculture and urban growth placed enormous stress on the tropical environment. Forests were cleared for fields and to make plaster for buildings, since burning limestone to make lime plaster requires enormous amounts of wood. Soil erosion increased. The productivity of fields declined. Some regions experienced deforestation so severe that it altered local climate patterns, reducing rainfall in areas that were already vulnerable to drought. And drought there was. Paleoclimatic evidence from lake sediments and cave formations indicates that the Maya lowlands experienced a series of severe droughts during the 9th and early 10th centuries, some of the worst in thousands of years. For a civilization so dependent on rain-fed agriculture, for cities with populations of tens of thousands sustained by crops grown in surrounding fields, drought was catastrophic. Crop failures led to famine. Famine led to social stress, to conflict over diminishing resources, to the breakdown of the systems of trade and tribute that supported specialized laborers and the elite classes. As conditions worsened, people may have lost faith in their rulers. Remember, Maya kings were not just political leaders but sacred intermediaries whose rituals were supposed to maintain cosmic order and ensure prosperity. Persistent drought and famine suggested that the rulers had failed in their most fundamental duties. The supernatural basis of their authority was undermined. Warfare intensified during this period. Palaces were burned. Fortifications were built in places that had never needed them before. The delicate balance of power between competing city-states, already precarious, collapsed into destructive conflicts. Some scholars speak of a systems collapse, where environmental stress, warfare, loss of trade networks, loss of confidence in traditional authority structures, and demographic decline fed into each other in a vicious cycle from which recovery proved impossible. Yet we must be careful not to speak of the Maya collapse as if it were the end of Maya civilization. The southern lowland cities declined, yes, but Maya people continued to live in the region, in smaller settlements, in rural areas, maintaining their language and many of their traditions. And in the northern lowlands, particularly in the Yucatan, Maya civilization continued and in some ways flourished during the period that archaeologists call the post-classic, from roughly 900 to 1500 years into the Common Era. The greatest city of this post-classic period was Chichen Itza, whose very name evokes mystery and wonder. Chichen Itza means, at the mouth of the well of the Itza, referring to the great cenote that provided water to the city. The site had been occupied since the Classic period, but it reached its height between the 9th and 11th centuries, exactly when the southern cities were collapsing. Chichen Itza displays a fascinating blend of Maya traditions with influences from central Mexico, particularly from a culture associated with the legendary city of Tula. The architecture includes traditional Maya elements alongside features more common in central Mexican cities. The style is sometimes called Maya Toltec, though the nature of the relationship between Chichen Itza and central Mexican cultures remains debated. The most iconic structure at Chichen Itza is El Castillo, also called the Temple of Kukulkan. This stepped pyramid rises in 9 terraces to a temple platform at the summit. Each of the 4 sides has a stairway with 91 steps. Add the platform on top and the total is 365, corresponding to the days of the solar year. The pyramid is precisely oriented so that during the spring and fall equinoxes, the afternoon sun creates a shadow pattern on the northern stairway that resembles a serpent descending from the summit. This serpent connects to the great serpent heads carved in stone at the base of the stairway. Thousands of people visit Chichen Itza each equinox to witness this phenomenon, this marriage of architecture and astronomy, stone and light, that the Maya designed more than 1,000 years ago. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza is the largest in Mesoamerica, stretching 168 meters in length. The ball game, played throughout Mesoamerica for millennia, was not mere sport but a ritual with cosmic significance. Teams competed to keep a heavy rubber ball in play, striking it with their hips, thighs, and arms but not their hands or feet, trying to send it through stone rings set high on the walls. The game reenacted mythological events, particularly the hero twins contests with the lords of the underworld described in the Popol Vuh. Some games ended with the sacrifice of one of the players, though scholars debate whether it was the winner or loser who was killed and whether sacrifice occurred after every game or only on special occasions. The acoustics of Chichen Itza's ball court are remarkable. A whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other, 100 meters away, and a handclap produces multiple echoes that sound like the call of the quetzal bird, sacred throughout Mesoamerica. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza was a pilgrimage site for centuries, a place where offerings were made to Chak and other water deities. In the early 20th century, the cenote was dredged, revealing thousands of artifacts: jade, gold, copper, obsidian, pottery, incense, rubber, and the bones of sacrificial victims, both adults and children. These offerings came from across Mesoamerica, evidence of Chichen Itza's importance as a religious center. The practice of throwing offerings and occasionally people into the cenote continued even after the city itself declined, evidence of the site's enduring sacred power. By the 12th century, Chichen Itza's power was waning. Political authority in the northern Yucatan shifted to a new city, Mayapan, which dominated the region from roughly the 13th to 15th centuries. Mayapan was smaller than Chichen Itza, more densely built, and surrounded by a defensive wall, suggesting a more troubled political climate. The city's architecture was generally less impressive than that of earlier Maya centers, perhaps indicating declining resources or changing priorities. Power at Mayapan was shared among competing elite families, a system that proved unstable. By the mid-15th century, Mayapan had been destroyed in a civil war, and political authority in the Yucatan fragmented into 16 competing provinces, each ruled by a halikuinik, a term usually translated as truman or supreme leader. This was the political situation when the first Spanish ships appeared off the Yucatan coast in 1517. The Maya world that the Europeans encountered was not in its prime, not like the great cities of the classic period, but it was still a living, vital civilization with millions of people, sophisticated agricultural systems, extensive trade networks, rich religious traditions, and centuries of accumulated knowledge and culture. The Spanish, fresh from the conquest of the Caribbean islands and seeking new lands to explore and exploit, saw an opportunity. The story of the Spanish conquest of the Maya is not a simple tale of swift subjugation. Unlike the Aztec Empire, which fell to Hernán Cortés in a matter of 2 years, the Maya resistance lasted generations. The fragmented nature of Maya political organization, which had been a source of conflict and instability, now became a form of protection. There was no central authority whose capture would cause the entire civilization to collapse. Each Maya polity had to be confronted separately, and even defeated cities sometimes rose in rebellion, forcing the Spanish to reconquer the same territory multiple times. The first Spanish expedition to reach the Yucatan was led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba in 1517. His ships encountered Maya traders in large canoes along the coast, and when the Spanish landed, they found stone cities unlike anything they had seen in the Caribbean islands. The Maya they met were clothed, unlike the Taino and other Caribbean peoples. They had books, which astonished the Spanish. They had gold, which interested the Spanish greatly. But they were also fiercely independent and well armed with bows, spears, and swords edged with razor-sharp obsidian. When Córdoba's men attempted to take water and supplies, they were attacked and driven back to their ships with heavy losses. Córdoba himself was wounded and died soon after returning to Cuba. The following year, Juan de Grijalva led another expedition along the coast, trading with the Maya and gathering information. Then in 1519 came Cortés, who would go on to conquer the Aztec Empire. Cortés passed along the Yucatan coast but did not attempt conquest there, instead heading to the Mexican mainland. But one member of his expedition would have profound effects on Maya history. His name was Geronimo de Aguilar, a Spanish priest who had been shipwrecked on the Yucatan coast years earlier and had lived among the Maya, learning their language and customs. Aguilar served as a translator for Cortés and later for other conquistadors, his knowledge of Maya language helping to facilitate both communication and conquest. The actual conquest of the Yucatan began in 1527 under Francisco de Montejo, who had been granted authority over the peninsula by the Spanish crown. Montejo, his son, and his nephew, all confusingly bearing the same name, spent nearly 20 years fighting a series of campaigns against Maya resistance. The fighting was brutal. The Maya used guerrilla tactics, disappearing into the forest after attacks, avoiding pitched battles where Spanish steel and horses gave the invaders an advantage. They ambushed supply columns, attacked at night, and besieged Spanish settlements. The heat, disease, and lack of supplies killed more Spanish soldiers than Maya arrows did. Several times the Spanish were forced to withdraw entirely, abandoning their precarious footholds. But the Spanish had advantages beyond military technology. They could draw on reinforcements from Cuba and New Spain, while Maya forces, drawn from individual provinces, could not coordinate their resistance across the entire peninsula. Perhaps more devastatingly, the Spanish brought diseases to which the Maya had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, typhus, and other Old World diseases swept through Maya populations in devastating waves. Entire communities were decimated. In some areas, half or more of the population died within a few years of first contact. The demographic catastrophe weakened Maya resistance in ways that Spanish arms alone could never have achieved. Villages that might have sent warriors to fight instead struggled simply to survive, to bury their dead, to plant and harvest enough food to keep their diminished populations alive. By 1546, the Spanish had established control over most of the northern and western Yucatan, founding the city of Mérida on the ruins of the Maya city of Though. But the eastern coast and the interior of the peninsula remained unconquered, home to independent Maya groups who continued to resist for decades. In the Petén region of present-day Guatemala, the Itzá Maya maintained an independent kingdom centered at their capital city of Najpatén, located on an island in Lake Petén Itzá. This kingdom remained free until 1697, more than 170 years after the first Spanish attempts at conquest, making it one of the last independent indigenous polities in the Americas. The highland Maya of Guatemala faced a different but equally tragic fate. When Pedro de Alvarado, one of Cortés's most ruthless lieutenants, invaded the highlands in 1524, he confronted several powerful Maya kingdoms, particularly the Quiché and the Kaqchikel. The Quiché fielded large armies led by their warrior Prince Tiqueñuman, who according to tradition wore quetzal feathers and fought with extraordinary courage. But Spanish cavalry and cannons, combined with thousands of indigenous allies from central Mexico who bore their own grievances against highland powers, overwhelmed Quiché defenses. Tiqueñuman was killed in battle, and the Quiché capital of Comarcage was burned. Alvarado was not merely brutal but sadistic, even by the harsh standards of the conquistadors. He burned alive Maya leaders who refused to convert to Christianity or reveal the locations of gold. He enslaved thousands to work in mines and on plantations. He destroyed temples and books, attempting to eradicate Maya religion and culture. The highland Maya population, which may have numbered several million before contact, was reduced to a fraction of that within a generation, victims of warfare, forced labor, disease, and despair. Yet even in the face of this catastrophe, Maya people and culture endured. The Maya adapted, found ways to survive under colonial rule, and maintained their identity in the face of immense pressure to assimilate. Spanish colonial policy aimed at concentrating dispersed Maya populations into nucleated towns called reductions, where they could be more easily controlled, taxed, and converted to Christianity. Catholic churches were built in Maya towns, often directly on top of destroyed Maya temples, a physical manifestation of the replacement of one religious system with another. Maya people were forced to abandon their traditional dress, their public rituals, their autonomous governance. They were required to pay tribute to Spanish colonial authorities and to the Catholic Church. They were subjected to a labor system called encomienda and later repartimiento, which was essentially legalized forced labor that differed from slavery in name more than substance. But beneath this surface of Christianization and Spanish control, Maya culture continued. People continued to speak their languages at home, even if they had to use Spanish in official contexts. They continued to cultivate their traditional crops using traditional methods. They incorporated Catholic saints into their religious worldview, sometimes identifying saints with traditional Maya deities in a syncretic blend that preserved ancient beliefs in new forms. They hid their books, the precious few that had escaped Spanish book burnings, treasuring them in secret. They maintained their traditional knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and medicine, passing it down from generation to generation through oral tradition and carefully guarded writings. One of the most important documents to survive from this period is the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Kitch Maya. The original hieroglyphic version was probably destroyed during the conquest, but sometime in the mid-16th century, members of the Kitch nobility wrote down the text using Spanish letters to represent Kitch words. This alphabetic version preserves the creation myths and histories of the Kitch people. It tells of the gods' attempts to create beings who could worship them properly, first forming humans from mud, which dissolved in water, then from wood, which lacked souls and feelings, and finally from maize dough, which proved perfect. It recounts the adventures of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Spalank, who descended into Xibalba to avenge their father and uncle, defeating the lords of death through cleverness and skill at the ballgame. It narrates the migrations and conquests of the Kitch people, their relationships with neighboring groups, their ruling dynasties and the deeds of their kings. Without this text, our understanding of Maya mythology and history would be immeasurably poorer. Another crucial source is the work of Diego de Landa, the same Franciscan bishop who ordered the burning of Maya books at Mani. Later in his life, perhaps feeling some remorse or simply recognizing the value of what was being lost, de Landa wrote a detailed account of Maya culture, the Relation de las Cosas de Yucatán. Despite his role in destroying Maya books, his account preserved important information about Maya daily life, religion, calendar, and society. Most importantly, he recorded a partial key to the Maya writing system, showing how certain glyphs corresponded to Spanish letters. Though his understanding was incomplete and somewhat confused, this key would prove crucial centuries later when scholars began the work of deciphering Maya hieroglyphs. Throughout the colonial period, which lasted 300 years, the Maya endured. They survived epidemics that returned in waves, smallpox in the 16th century, typhus and measles in the 17th, smallpox again in the 18th. They survived economic exploitation, heavy taxation, and forced labor. They survived attempts to destroy their culture and identity. And periodically they resisted, not just passively but actively, with violence when necessary. There were numerous Maya rebellions during the colonial period, uprisings against tribute demands, against forced labor, against the attacks on their religion and autonomy. Most were suppressed brutally, but they testified to an enduring spirit of independence. The colonial order finally began to crack in the early 19th century. The wars of independence that swept through Latin America reached the Maya regions. Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, and the Maya territories that had been part of the Captaincy General of Guatemala became part of the newly independent nations of Mexico and the Central American republics. But independence for the Spanish-descended Creole elites who led these nations did not mean freedom for the Maya. The new republics maintained many of the exploitative systems of the colonial period. Maya communities still faced heavy taxation, land theft, forced labor, and cultural suppression. In the Yucatan Peninsula, these tensions exploded in 1847 in what became known as the Caste War, one of the most successful indigenous rebellions in the Americas. The war began in response to increasing pressure from Mexican authorities and landowners who were seizing communal Maya lands to create large plantations called haciendas, particularly for growing henequen, a type of agave plant whose fibers were used to make rope. Maya laborers on these haciendas were treated essentially as slaves, trapped by debt peonage that they could never repay. The rebellion began in the town of Tepic and spread rapidly. Maya forces, armed mostly with machetes and captured firearms, attacked haciendas and towns, driving Mexican settlers and authorities from much of the eastern and southern Yucatan. At one point, the rebels came close to capturing Mérida, the peninsula's capital. The Mexican government, facing crisis, offered to cede the Yucatan to Spain, Britain, or the United States in exchange for military support. All refused. But the Maya offensive stalled when the rains came and farmers returned to their villages to plant maize, a reminder that this was a rebellion of agricultural people whose survival depended on getting crops in the ground at the right time. The Mexican forces rallied and gradually pushed back, but they could not completely suppress the rebellion. Some Maya groups retreated into the forests of what is now Quintana Roo, where they established an independent state that lasted for more than 50 years. This state, centered around the town of Chan Santa Cruz, was organized around a religious movement focused on a speaking cross that delivered messages from God and traditional Maya deities. The speaking cross state, as historians sometimes call it, maintained its independence through a combination of military resistance and the difficulty of conquering the dense forests and swamps where they had taken refuge. The Mexican government did not fully suppress this last pocket of Maya independence until 1901, and even then Maya resistance continued sporadically for years afterward. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were particularly difficult times for Maya communities throughout Mexico and Central America. The spread of coffee plantations, especially in Guatemala, led to increased pressure on Maya lands and labor. The liberal governments of the period, influenced by positivist ideologies that saw indigenous cultures as obstacles to progress, implemented policies aimed at forced assimilation. Maya people were prohibited from wearing traditional dress in some areas, from speaking their languages in schools, from practicing their traditional customs. Land that had been communally held by indigenous communities for centuries was privatized and sold to Ladino, or non-indigenous, farmers and foreign investors. In Guatemala, this culminated in a system of forced labor that required Maya men to work a certain number of days each year on coastal plantations, often in horrible conditions far from their highland communities. The pay was minimal, the work brutal, and the death toll high. Families were separated. Communities were disrupted. This system continued well into the 20th century, only beginning to change after the Guatemalan Revolution of 1944, which briefly implemented land reform and labor protections before being overthrown by a CIA-backed coup in 1954. Yet through all of this, Maya communities maintained their identity, their languages, their connection to the land and to their ancestors. In villages throughout the Maya region, traditional governance structures continued to operate alongside or beneath official state structures. Communities maintained their agricultural traditions, their weaving and craft traditions, their ceremonies and celebrations tied to the agricultural year and the Catholic calendar. The cofradias, religious brotherhoods that were ostensibly Catholic but often incorporated traditional Maya beliefs and practices, became important institutions for maintaining community cohesion and cultural identity. Maya languages not only survived but continued to evolve, incorporating Spanish loanwords while maintaining their fundamental grammar and vocabulary. Today, more than 6 million people speak Maya languages, making the Maya one of the largest indigenous groups in the Americas. The major Maya languages include Yucatec Maya, spoken in the Yucatan Peninsula, Kich, spoken in the Guatemalan highlands, Quechua, Mam, Kaqchikel, and many others, 30 or more distinct languages depending on how one counts them. Each has its own dialects, its own literature, its own history. These languages are living, used daily in millions of homes, markets, and fields, carried forward by people who are not museum pieces or relics of the past but contemporary individuals navigating the complexities of the modern world while maintaining connections to traditions stretching back millennia. The rediscovery and study of ancient Maya civilization by archaeologists and epigraphers has been a long process, starting in earnest in the 19th century and continuing to the present day. Early explorers like John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood traveled through the Maya regions in the 1830s and 40s, documenting ruins that had been overgrown for centuries. Stephens's vivid descriptions and Catherwood's detailed drawings, published in popular books, brought Maya civilization to the attention of the wider world for the first time since the conquest. The ruins were not merely interesting archaeological sites. They were proof of the sophistication and achievements of indigenous American civilizations, a powerful counter to the prevailing racist ideologies that portrayed native peoples as primitive and incapable of high culture. The 20th century saw an explosion in Maya archaeology and scholarship. Major excavations at sites like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Chichen Itza revealed the scale and complexity of ancient Maya cities. The decipherment of Maya writing, which accelerated dramatically in the latter part of the century, allowed scholars to read the words of ancient Maya scribes, to learn the names of kings and queens, to understand something of their thoughts and concerns. Advances in dating techniques, particularly radiocarbon dating, allowed for more precise chronologies. New technologies like LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to map terrain beneath forest canopy, have revealed the true extent of Maya settlement, showing that the ancient population was much larger than previously believed and that the landscape was far more modified by human activity than anyone had imagined. This ongoing research continues to transform our understanding of Maya civilization. We now know that rather than being a simple agricultural society with ceremonial centers, Maya cities were true urban environments with large, complex populations. We know that Maya warfare was more frequent and more brutal than early scholars, influenced by romantic notions of peaceful astronomers, wanted to believe. We know that the Maya were sophisticated engineers who managed water resources through reservoirs, canals, and other hydraulic works. We know that trade networks connected the Maya world not just internally but with cultures throughout Mesoamerica and beyond. We know that the Maya were not unified but rather organized in competing city-states with complex and shifting alliances. We know that environmental factors, including deforestation and drought, played important roles in Maya history, but that human choices, conflicts, and ingenuity mattered just as much. What we are learning, most fundamentally, is that the Maya were human beings, as complex and contradictory as people anywhere. They created beauty and practiced violence. They made brilliant observations of the natural world and sometimes exhausted the resources around them. They built magnificent cities and abandoned them when conditions changed. They developed sophisticated philosophies and engaged in petty political conflicts. They were capable of great wisdom and great folly. They were, in other words, us, separated by time and culture but sharing the fundamental human experiences of love and loss, hope and fear, the struggle to make meaning in an uncertain world. For contemporary Maya people, the relationship with this ancient past is complex. The magnificent ruins are a source of pride, evidence of their ancestors' achievements. But they are also sometimes a source of frustration, as tourists and researchers come from around the world to study and visit sites that stand in the midst of Maya communities that often face poverty and marginalization. The Maya are not vanished. They are here, working as farmers and doctors, weavers and teachers, politicians and activists, artists and engineers. They are maintaining their languages and adapting them to new technologies. They are practicing their traditions and creating new cultural expressions. They are asserting their rights to land, to political representation, to cultural preservation, to economic opportunity. The Maya have faced tremendous challenges in recent decades. In Guatemala during the civil war that lasted from 1960 to 1996, Maya communities were specifically targeted for repression by the military government. Entire villages were destroyed. More than 200,000 people were killed or disappeared, the vast majority of them Maya. The violence was so systematic and targeted that a United Nations Truth Commission concluded that it constituted genocide. The trauma of this period remains fresh, and the work of justice and reconciliation continues. In Mexico, particularly in Chiapas, Maya communities have also faced violence and marginalization, leading to the Zapatista uprising of 1994, when indigenous groups led by the Zapatista Army of National Liberation took control of several towns, demanding land rights, political autonomy, and an end to discrimination. The Mexican government's military response was brutal, but the Zapatistas maintained control of some areas and drew international attention to the conditions facing indigenous communities. The movement, which was timed to coincide with the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, explicitly connected indigenous rights with broader questions of economic justice and globalization. In Belize, which has the smallest Maya population but where Maya culture remains vital, communities have fought for recognition of their traditional land rights and for the preservation of archaeological sites. Throughout the Maya region, there are ongoing struggles over development projects, tourism operations at ancient sites, and environmental destruction. There are debates about who controls the narrative of Maya history and culture, who benefits from the tourism that ancient Maya sites generate, and how to balance preservation of archaeological heritage with the needs of contemporary communities. Yet there are also reasons for hope and optimism. Maya languages are being taught in schools, recorded in dictionaries and grammars, used in literature and digital media. Maya cultural practices, from weaving to traditional agriculture to ceremonial practices, are being documented and revitalized. Maya activists and intellectuals are prominent in movements for indigenous rights throughout Latin America. Maya artists are creating work that bridges traditional and contemporary forms, speaking to both local and global audiences. Young people are finding ways to be both Maya and modern, to maintain their cultural identity while engaging with the wider world on their own terms. The ancient sites themselves, those pyramids rising from the jungle, those plazas where ceremonies were performed 1,000 years ago, those stone monuments carved with hieroglyphic texts, they continue to speak to us. They remind us of the impermanence of even the greatest civilizations, but also of the enduring human capacity to create meaning and beauty. They show us that history is not simple, that rise and fall are not the only patterns, that collapse is not the end of a story but perhaps a transition to a new chapter. They teach us that the past is not dead, that it lives on in descendants who carry forward genetic, cultural, and spiritual connections across the centuries. When you walk through Tikal in the early morning, when the mist still clings to the forest floor and the howler monkeys are just beginning their calls, when you climb to the top of Temple 4 and look out over the canopy to see the other temple tops rising like islands in a green sea, you cannot help but feel the presence of those who built these structures, who lived their lives in this place, who watched these same sunrises, who gazed up at these same stars. The names that archaeologists have recovered, Jasa Chan Kawil, Yikin Chan Kawil, Lady Six Sky, Kinichaks Kuk Mo, these are not abstract labels but identities, individuals who once breathed and thought and felt, who made decisions that shaped the lives of thousands, whose actions ripple down to us across the centuries. At Palenque, tucked into the foothills where the lowlands meet the highlands, where waterfalls cascade through the ruins and the air is cool even in the tropical heat, you can enter the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, one of the longest reigning and most successful Maya rulers. He came to power in 615 at the age of 12 and ruled for 68 years until his death in 683. His jade-covered burial mask, discovered when archaeologists opened his tomb in 1952, gazes out at visitors with the same serene expression it bore when it was placed on his face more than 1,300 years ago. His sarcophagus lid, carved with an elaborate scene that some have bizarrely claimed shows him piloting a spaceship but which actually depicts his death and descent into the underworld where he will be reborn as the maize god, represents one of the masterpieces of Maya art. The temple built over his tomb, the Temple of the Inscriptions, rises in 9 levels representing the 9 levels of the underworld, each step a symbolic descent and ascent, death and rebirth, the eternal cycle. At Copan, you can see the artistry of Maya sculptors at its finest. The stelae in the Great Plaza are not just monuments but portraits, capturing individual faces with remarkable realism while simultaneously representing the rulers as divine beings adorned with the regalia of gods. The ball court markers show the ball game as cosmic drama. The hieroglyphic stairway tells the history of the dynasty in more than 2,000 glyphs, the longest Maya text in stone. The Rosalila Temple, buried beneath later construction and painstakingly tunneled into by archaeologists, preserves its original painted decoration, brilliant reds and greens and yellows as vivid as the day they were applied 1,500 years ago. The Rosalila is a vision of how these cities looked in their prime, not the weathered gray stone we usually see but blazing with color, every surface painted and decorated, a visual feast that must have been overwhelming in its intensity. At Calakmul, deep in the jungle near the Mexico-Guatemala border, far from tourists and accessible only by a long drive on a narrow road through the forest, you can climb Structure 2, one of the largest Maya pyramids ever built, rising more than 50 meters high. From its summit, on a clear day, you can see other ancient cities on the horizon, El Mirador and Tikal far to the south in Guatemala, reminders that you are standing in what was once a densely populated cultural heartland, not an isolated outpost but the center of a vibrant, interconnected world. The forest that surrounds Calakmul now, which seems so pristine and ancient, is actually recovering from the intense human use of the classic period. The trees growing from the ruins are testament to nature's resilience but also to the transformations that human civilizations can work upon the landscape. At Uxmal, the refined elegance of Puuc architecture reaches its apex. The stonework is so precise that even after 1,000 years, you cannot slip a knife blade between many of the stones. The geometric patterns decorating the facades, the lattices and mosaics and stone columns, represent thousands of hours of careful work by master craftsmen. The astronomical precision of the building's orientation, aligned to solar and Venus cycles, demonstrates the integration of art, architecture, and scientific knowledge. The site is a poem in stone, each building a stanza, the whole complex a meditation on beauty, order, and the human place in the cosmos. These sites, and hundreds of others throughout the Maya region, are not just tourist destinations or archaeological resources, though they are both of those things. They are sacred places for many Maya people, locations where connections to ancestors can be felt, where traditional ceremonies are still sometimes performed, where the boundary between past and present becomes permeable. When contemporary Maya spiritual leaders perform ceremonies at ancient sites, burning copal incense and offering prayers in the languages their ancestors spoke, they are not engaging in historical reenactment but in living religious practice, maintaining traditions that have adapted and changed but never entirely broken. The study of Maya civilization also reminds us of the fragility of human achievements and the importance of sustainability. The environmental challenges that contributed to the classic Maya collapse, deforestation, soil erosion, water scarcity, have contemporary parallels. Climate change, deforestation, overpopulation, these are not abstract concerns but pressing realities in the Maya region today, as they are globally. The Maya experience shows us that even sophisticated civilizations with advanced knowledge can overextend themselves, can degrade their environments to the point where recovery becomes difficult or impossible. But it also shows us human resilience, the capacity to adapt, survive, and rebuild even after catastrophic collapses. The sophistication of Maya astronomy reminds us that scientific knowledge is not the monopoly of any one culture or time period. The Maya were making precise astronomical observations and complex mathematical calculations at a time when much of Europe was in the chaos of the early medieval period. They developed a concept of zero independently of the Old World. They created a writing system that was fully capable of representing their language. They built cities with populations in the tens of thousands without metal tools or wheeled vehicles. These achievements should dispel any notion that progress is linear or that some cultures are inherently superior to others. Human ingenuity and creativity appear in all times and places, taking different forms in different contexts but always present, always pushing at the boundaries of what is possible. The persistence of Maya culture in the face of 500 years of colonialism, violence, and attempted cultural genocide is a testament to the strength of cultural identity and the importance of language, tradition, and community in human life. The survival and revival of Maya languages in particular is remarkable. In an age of increasing linguistic homogenization, when minority languages are disappearing around the world at an alarming rate, the fact that millions of people continue to speak Maya languages, that these languages are being taught to new generations, that they are being used in literature and digital media, is precious and important. Every language represents a unique way of understanding and expressing the world. When a language dies, we lose not just words but an entire conceptual universe, a way of thinking and being that can never be fully recovered. The Maya conception of time, cyclical rather than linear, offers an alternative to the Western notion of progress as an inevitable forward march. The Maya saw time as a series of repeating cycles, each with its own character and potential. The past was not dead and gone but present and accessible, patterns that could inform the future. This cyclical view does not mean that the Maya saw history as simple repetition or that they believed human action was futile. Rather, it meant that they saw continuity and change as intertwined, that understanding the past was essential to navigating the present and future. There is wisdom in this perspective, a recognition that human nature remains constant even as circumstances change, that the challenges our ancestors faced often resemble our own, that we can learn from their successes and failures. The Maya relationship with maize, seeing it not just as food but as sacred, as the substance from which humanity was made, represents a profound connection between people and the plants they cultivate. In the Popol Vuh, after the gods failed to create suitable humans from mud and wood, they finally succeeded by making people from maize dough. This myth expresses a fundamental truth, that the Maya people and maize co-evolved, that they shaped each other through thousands of years of interaction. Wild Teos Inte, the ancestor of maize, barely resembles the corn we know today. It was transformed through careful selection by countless generations of farmers into one of the world's most important crops. And those farmers were in turn shaped by maize, their diets, their settlement patterns, their entire way of life organized around its cultivation. This relationship between humans and domesticated plants is one of the most important stories in human history, and the Maya-maize relationship is one of its most profound examples. The beauty of Maya art, from the elaborate facades of buildings to the delicate paintings on pottery to the intricately carved jade ornaments, reminds us that humans have always sought to create beauty, to express themselves aesthetically, to leave something beautiful for others to experience. Art is not a luxury but a fundamental human need, present in every culture, every time period. The Maya aesthetic, with its love of curving forms, its horror vacui that filled every surface with decoration, its sophisticated use of symbolism and metaphor, represents one of the great artistic traditions of human history. When you look at a Maya-painted vase showing a palace scene, with nobles in elaborate costume attended by dwarfs and surrounded by hieroglyphic texts, or at a jade mask with its serene expression and precise craftsmanship, or at the stucco facades of Palenque's palace with their elegant portraiture, you are encountering art that speaks across the centuries, that communicates something essential about the human experience even when cultural specifics may be obscure. The violence in Maya history, the warfare and sacrifice, should not be hidden or excused, but it should be understood in context. All civilizations have practiced violence. All human societies have found ways to kill each other, often in the name of religion, power, or resources. The Maya were no more violent than medieval Europeans or ancient Romans or any number of other societies we study and even admire. Human sacrifice, which seems particularly horrific to modern sensibilities, was understood very differently by the Maya. It was not cruelty but cosmic necessity, a way of maintaining balance in the universe, of repaying debts to the gods, of ensuring that the sun would rise and the rains would come. This does not make it acceptable by modern ethical standards, but it helps us understand it as something other than simple barbarism. The challenge for us is to acknowledge the full complexity of Maya civilization, its achievements and its violence, its wisdom and its blind spots, without falling into either romantic idealization or moral condemnation. As the night deepens and your breathing slows, as the worries of the day fade into the background and the gentle current of history carries you along, let your mind rest in the forests of the Maya lands. Picture the pyramids rising through morning mist. Hear the distant calls of howler monkeys. Smell the copal incense. Feel the weight of jade beads. Taste chocolate prepared as the Maya did, bitter and spiced, frothed by pouring it from one vessel to another. See the night sky as the Maya saw it, diamond bright in the absence of electric lights, the Milky Way a luminous river flowing across the heavens, the planets tracing their predictable paths, the constellations telling their eternal stories. The story of the Maya is ultimately a story about what it means to be human, to build and create, to struggle and endure, to search for meaning in a vast and often incomprehensible universe. It is a story about the relationship between humans and nature, about the possibilities and limits of human knowledge, about the power and fragility of civilizations. It is a story that continues today, not just in ruins and in books but in living communities, in languages spoken daily, in traditions maintained and adapted, in people who carry forward the heritage of millennia while engaging with the challenges and opportunities of the contemporary world. The Maya built their cities knowing that they would endure. They carved their monuments to last for centuries. They recorded their histories in stone so that future generations would remember. And we do remember. When archaeologists decipher a new text, when a tourist climbs a pyramid, when a Maya child learns to write in their ancestral language, when a weaver passes traditional patterns to her daughter, when scholars piece together the fragments of the past, we are all participating in an ongoing conversation across time, a dialogue between past and present that enriches both. In the end, what the Maya civilization teaches us is perhaps this, that human beings are capable of remarkable things when they work together over long periods of time, that culture and knowledge are built up gradually through countless individual contributions, that setbacks and collapses are not endings but transitions, that identity and tradition can persist through almost unimaginable hardships, and that the past is never truly gone as long as someone remembers, as long as someone tells the story, as long as the monuments stand and the languages are spoken and the traditions are practiced. So as you drift into sleep, let the story of the Maya drift with you. Let it remind you of the vastness of human history, of the countless lives lived before us, of the civilizations that rose and fell and sometimes rose again, of the eternal human quest to understand, to create, to connect, to leave something behind that says we were here, we mattered, we loved, we built, we dreamed. The Maya did all of this. They lived under the same sky we see. They felt the same sun on their skin. They loved their children as we love ours. They wondered about the same fundamental mysteries. They are us, and we are them, separated by centuries but joined by our common humanity. Sleep now, gentle listener, with visions of jade and stone, of pyramids and plazas, of forests and cenotes, of ancient wisdom and enduring tradition. Sleep with the knowledge that history is not just names and dates but stories, human stories, as alive now as when they were first lived. The Maya are still here, their descendants still walking the lands their ancestors built, still speaking the languages that have been spoken for millennia, still connected to traditions that stretch back to the very dawn of civilization in the Americas. Their story is not over. It continues, evolving, adapting, enduring. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough in that space between waking and sleeping, You might hear the echo of ancient voices, the whisper of wind through temple corridors, the distant rhythm of drums, the sacred words of prayers spoken in languages older than nations, the accumulated wisdom of 3,000 years of human experience in the green heart of Mesoamerica. The Maya world was vast and complex, full of beauty and struggle, achievement and failure, wisdom and folly, just like our world today. By understanding it, we understand ourselves a little better. We see our own challenges reflected in theirs, we recognize patterns that repeat across cultures and centuries, and perhaps, if we are wise, we learn from both their triumphs and their mistakes. The Maya world, even in its most distant past, was never truly isolated from the broader currents of Mesoamerican civilization. Long before the Great Pyramids rose at Tikal or Palenque, before the first hieroglyphs were carved, the peoples of this region were part of a wider network of cultural exchange that connected the Pacific and Atlantic coasts, the highlands and lowlands, the northern deserts and southern jungles. Ideas traveled along trade routes carried by merchants who spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, but shared certain fundamental assumptions about how the universe worked and what it meant to be human. Consider the Olmec, that mysterious culture that flourished along the Gulf Coast of Mexico from roughly 1200 to 400 years before the Common Era. The Olmec are sometimes called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, and while the terminology is perhaps too simple, there is no question that Olmec influence spread widely. Their distinctive art style, featuring war jaguars and colossal stone heads, appears in regions far from the Olmec heartland. Olmec jade carvings have been found in Maya sites. Olmec motifs appear in early Maya art. Did Olmec traders travel through the Maya lowlands? Did Maya pilgrims visit Olmec ceremonial centers? Did ideas simply flow from community to community, transformed and adapted as they went? We cannot know for certain, but the connections were real, tangible, important. The ball game, that ritual sport played throughout Mesoamerica, almost certainly predates both the Olmec and the Maya, stretching back perhaps 3,500 years. The earliest ball courts have been found in regions that would later be part of the Maya world, suggesting that if anything, the Maya may have been among the originators of this tradition that would spread across all of Mesoamerica. The game itself was played with a solid rubber ball, remarkably heavy, that players kept in motion using only their hips, thighs, knees, and arms, never their hands or feet. The playing alley was shaped like a capital I, with sloping side walls off which the ball could bounce. Later versions included stone rings set high on these walls, and passing the ball through a ring was the ultimate achievement, immediately ending the game. But the ball game was never just a sport, a way to pass time or demonstrate athletic prowess. It was cosmology enacted, mythology made physical. The ball court itself represented the portal between the world of the living and Xibalba, the underworld. The game reenacted the contests between the hero twins and the Death Lords. The movement of the ball represented the movement of celestial bodies across the sky. Victory and defeat had supernatural implications, demonstrating divine favor or disfavor. The acoustics of ball courts, many of which produce remarkable echoes and sound effects, were carefully designed and must have added to the ritual atmosphere, creating an environment where sound itself became numinous, where the crack of ball against stone wall reverberated like thunder, where the shouts of spectators were amplified and transformed. Some games ended in sacrifice, though as mentioned, scholars debate how frequently this occurred and who exactly was sacrificed. The famous ball court panels at Chichen Itza show a victorious player holding the severed head of an opponent, while serpents and vegetation sprout from the victim's neck, suggesting themes of death leading to new life, of blood feeding the earth, of sacrifice as renewal. Whether this scene depicted what actually happened after games or represented a mythological or idealized scenario remains uncertain. What is clear is that the ball game was serious, sacred, dangerous, and absolutely central to Mesoamerican religious life for thousands of years. The Maya shared with other Mesoamerican cultures a calendrical tradition, though they developed it in unique and sophisticated ways. The basic structure of the two interlocking calendars, the sacred Sokin and the solar Hab, creating the calendar round of 52 years, was common throughout Mesoamerica. But the long count, that system for tracking absolute dates across millennia, seems to have been particularly developed by the Maya and their neighbors in southeastern Mesoamerica. The earliest long count dates appear not in the Maya heartland but in areas influenced by the Olmec and by cultures like the Zapotec of Oaxaca. These date systems were not invented by one person or culture but evolved gradually through generations of observation and calculation, refined by countless astronomers and calendar priests whose names we will never know but whose intellectual work undergirds one of humanity's great achievements. The Maya relationship with their neighbors was complex and ever-changing. To the west and north lay cultures that the Maya traded with, fought with, intermarried with, and learned from. The great city of Teotihuacan in central Mexico, which reached its peak between roughly 1 and 600 years into the Common Era, maintained important connections with Maya cities. Teotihuacan's distinctive artistic style and iconography appear at Tikal, Copan, and other Maya sites. Whether this represents military conquest, trading relationships, diplomatic alliances, or religious influence remains debated. The evidence suggests different types of relationships at different times and places. Some Maya cities may have been directly controlled by Teotihuacan for a time. Others may have simply borrowed prestigious foreign symbols to enhance their own local authority. Still others may have had marriage alliances that brought Teotihuacan princesses or princes into Maya dynasties, carrying cultural traditions with them. When Teotihuacan collapsed in the 7th century, destroyed by fire and never reoccupied, the reverberations were felt throughout Mesoamerica. Trade networks were disrupted. Political alliances shifted. Maya cities that had looked to Teotihuacan as a source of legitimacy and power had to reorient themselves. The classic Maya civilization reached its peak in the century or two after Teotihuacan's fall, suggesting that Maya cities may have actually benefited from the power vacuum, able to assert themselves without the overwhelming presence of that great metropolis to the west. In the highlands of Guatemala and Chiapas, Maya groups maintained complex relationships with their lowland cousins. The highlands were different in almost every way, cooler, drier, more mountainous, with different resources and different challenges. Highland cities never grew as large as Tikal or Calakmul. Their architecture was less monumental. But they controlled important resources, particularly obsidian, that volcanic glass essential for tools and weapons in a world without metal technology. The obsidian mines of the Guatemalan highlands provided raw material that was traded throughout the Maya world and beyond. Highland and lowland Maya spoke related but distinct languages, maintained different political structures, and developed somewhat different cultural traditions, but they remained connected through trade, through occasional warfare, and through shared Maya identity. To the south and east, the Maya world faded gradually into regions occupied by other indigenous groups. There was no sharp border, no wall marking where Maya territory ended. Instead, there were zones of interaction, places where Maya and non-Maya lived side by side, traded with each other, sometimes fought, sometimes intermarried. Languages blended at the edges. Artistic styles merged. To define exactly where the Maya world ended and other worlds began is difficult, perhaps impossible, a reminder that cultural boundaries are often more fluid and permeable than maps would suggest. The sea was also important to the Maya, particularly to those communities along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts. The Maya were skilled seafarers, building large canoes that could carry dozens of people and substantial cargoes. When Columbus encountered a Maya trading canoe near the Bay Islands of Honduras during his fourth voyage in 1502, he described it as being as long as a Spanish galley, hollowed from a single massive tree trunk, with a palm leaf canopy sheltering the cargo. The goods it carried came from throughout Mesoamerica: copper bells from western Mexico, obsidian blades, cacao, colorful textiles, and more. These trading canoes traveled along the coast, stopping at ports to exchange goods, creating a maritime trading network that complemented the overland routes through the interior. Salt was one of the most important products of coastal trade. The northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula had extensive salt flats where seawater could be evaporated to produce salt, that essential preservative and flavoring that every human society needs. Control of salt production and trade could bring considerable wealth and power. The coastal sites that managed this trade often show evidence of foreign contacts and cosmopolitan populations, places where people from different regions met to exchange goods and undoubtedly shared stories, songs, religious practices, and ideas. Cacao, chocolate, was another product that shaped Maya trade and culture. The cacao tree, Theobroma cacao, the food of the gods as its scientific name suggests, grows in humid lowland regions. The Maya cultivated cacao in groves, protecting the sensitive trees with shade from taller plants, creating carefully managed forest gardens. The beans were harvested, fermented, dried, roasted, and ground into a paste that could be mixed with water, chili peppers, vanilla, and other flavorings to create a frothy, bitter drink very different from the sweet hot chocolate familiar today. This chocolate drink was consumed at ceremonies, used in rituals, served at royal courts. It was a luxury product, a marker of status. Cacao beans even served as a form of currency in some contexts, valuable enough to be counted and traded but common enough to be practical for everyday transactions. The Maya diet, though centered on maize, was diverse and sophisticated. Besides the basic triumvirate of maize, beans, and squash, they cultivated and gathered an astonishing array of foods. Chili peppers added fire to their meals. Tomatoes, avocados, and numerous varieties of fruits provided vitamins and variety. They hunted deer, peccary, and wild turkey in the forests. They kept domesticated dogs and turkeys for meat. They fished in rivers and along the coasts, catching everything from small freshwater fish to large sea turtles. They gathered honey from stingless bees, that sweet gift that was the only concentrated sugar available to them. They collected edible plants from the forest, mushrooms and greens and roots that supplemented their cultivated crops. This was not a monotonous diet but one rich in flavors, textures, and nutrients, carefully adapted to the tropical environment and refined over thousands of years of experimentation and tradition. The weaving traditions of Maya women represent another form of knowledge passed down through generations. Using backstrap looms, tools so simple that they can be set up almost anywhere but which in skilled hands can produce textiles of extraordinary complexity and beauty, Maya weavers created cloth that was not merely functional but artistic and symbolic. The patterns woven into textiles identified the wearer's community, status, and sometimes their personal history. Different towns had distinctive styles, particular color combinations, specific patterns that marked cloth as coming from one place rather than another. A skilled observer could look at someone's hupal, the traditional blouse worn by Maya women, and know immediately where they were from, perhaps even which family they belonged to. These weaving traditions continue today, maintained by women who sit at their looms as their mothers and grandmothers did, as women have done in these lands for millennia. The motifs they weave are not arbitrary decorations but carriers of meaning, some depicting animals and plants from the natural world, others representing cosmic symbols, the sun and moon, the four directions, the levels of the universe. When a young girl learns to weave from her mother, she is not just learning a craft but absorbing a way of seeing, a way of ordering the world, a connection to ancestors stretching back through time beyond counting. And so the story of the Maya becomes not just a tale of kings and pyramids, of wars and collapses, but something more intimate and enduring. It becomes a story of continuity maintained through the small, daily acts of ordinary people. The farmer who plants maize using techniques his ancestors developed. The woman who grinds corn on a stone metate as countless generations of women have done before her. The grandmother who tells traditional stories to her grandchildren, passing forward the wisdom and imagination of the ancestors. the young person who learns to write in their Maya language, carrying forward a linguistic tradition that has survived 500 years of pressure to abandon it. These are the true heroes of Maya civilization, not because they built monuments or won battles, but because they maintained connection, because they remembered, because they carried forward the thread of culture through times of peace and times of catastrophe, through golden ages and dark periods, never allowing the thread to break entirely. The ruins scattered throughout the Maya land stand as testament to ambition and achievement, but they also remind us that all human works are temporary, that stone itself eventually crumbles, that jungles reclaim cities, that time dissolves even the most determined attempts at permanence. Yet the ruins are not sad places, not really. They are peaceful, meditative, places where the boundary between past and present grows thin. When you stand in a plaza where ceremonies were performed 1,000 years ago, when you touch stones shaped by hands long turned to dust, when you read hieroglyphs carved by scribes whose names we sometimes know and sometimes don't, you are participating in a kind of immortality, not the immortality of never dying but the immortality of being remembered, of having your works and words carry forward across the vast ocean of time. The Maya understood this. They built their monuments knowing that stone outlasts flesh. They carved their histories knowing that writing preserves what memory forgets. They encoded their knowledge of astronomy and mathematics and calendar knowing that understanding, once achieved, can be passed forward even when civilizations fall. And they were right. We read their words today. We admire their buildings. We marvel at their calculations. We learn from their achievements and their mistakes. They are not forgotten. They endure in memory, in descendants, in the physical traces they left, and in the intangible cultural traditions that continue to shape millions of lives. As this long night's journey through Maya civilization draws toward its close, as your breathing deepens and the boundary between waking and dreaming grows ever more permeable, let yourself rest in the knowledge that you have touched something vast and profound. The Maya story, spanning more than 3,000 years from the first farming villages to the present day, encompasses everything that makes us human: our capacity for beauty and violence, our hunger for understanding and meaning, our need for connection to each other and to something larger than ourselves, our ability to create and destroy, to build up and tear down, to remember and forget and remember again. The pyramids will continue to stand, weathering slowly under sun and rain, their stones gradually returning to the earth from which they were quarried. The hieroglyphs will remain, some deciphered, others still guarding their secrets, waiting for future scholars to unlock them. The forests will breathe through their seasons, dry and wet, ancient and ever-renewing. The descendants of the Maya will continue their lives, navigating between tradition and modernity, maintaining their languages and cultures while adapting to new circumstances, carrying forward a heritage that connects them to the deepest roots of American civilization. And perhaps, in the end, that is the most important lesson the Maya offer us, that culture is not a museum piece, static and preserved behind glass, but a living river that flows from past through present into future. The Maya did not vanish, despite everything that happened to them. They adapted, survived, endured. Their civilization transformed but did not die. They are still here, still speaking the languages of their ancestors, still farming the same lands, still looking up at the same stars and seeing in them the patterns that their ancestors charted centuries ago. They have survived conquest and epidemic, colonialism and marginalization, and they persist, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the strength of cultural identity, and the power of memory to sustain a people through even the darkest times. So sleep now, gentle listener, with images of jade and obsidian, of pyramids and plazas, of hieroglyphs and calendars floating through your dreams. Sleep with the knowledge that the past is never truly past, that we are all connected to those who came before, that their struggles and triumphs echo in our own. Sleep with gratitude for the Maya, for all they created, for all they preserved, for all they teach us about what it means to be human, to reach for the stars while keeping our feet planted in the earth, to build for eternity while knowing that nothing lasts forever, to seek meaning in a universe that does not readily yield its secrets. The story continues, as stories always do, beyond these words, beyond this night, beyond any single telling. The Maya story is part of the larger human story, the story of our species on this planet, trying to understand where we came from and where we might be going, trying to create beauty and meaning in the brief span we are given, trying to leave something behind that says we mattered, we were here, we loved and built and dreamed. And in that universal story, in that great collective human endeavor across millennia, the Maya hold a place of honor, as architects and astronomers, as artists and farmers, as survivors and teachers. May you rest deeply now, surrounded by the silence that holds all histories, all voices, all the accumulated experience of humanity stretching back to our origins. May the gentle rhythms of the Maya world, the cycles of planting and harvest, the movements of planets across the sky, the alternation of dry and rainy seasons, the eternal dance of death and rebirth, carry you peacefully through the night. And may you wake with a sense of connection to the vast tapestry of human experience, knowing that we are all threads in this great weaving, each contributing our own small pattern to the larger design that spans continents and centuries, that connects ancient farmers in the Maya lowlands to you, lying here now, drifting softly into dreams where time dissolves and all moments exist at once. Good night, kind traveler through the passages of history. The Maya have shared their story with you, across the bridge of centuries, speaking through stone and word and living tradition. Carry it gently with you into sleep, and let it become part of your own story, as all history becomes when we truly listen, when we allow the voices of the past to speak to us across the silence, when we recognize in the faces of ancient kings and farmers, warriors and weavers, astronomers and scribes, reflections of ourselves and of all human hope and striving. The jungle breathes. The stones remember. The story continues. And you, having walked briefly through the Maya world, having listened to its whispers and witnessed its wonders, are now part of that continuation, that great conversation across time, that endless human endeavor to understand, to create, to connect, to matter, to endure. Rest now in peace, in the gentle embrace of history, in the knowledge that some things persist beyond the grasp of time, and that the Maya, ancient and modern, remain among us still, teaching, inspiring, enduring, a civilization that will not be forgotten, a people who have earned their place in the eternal memory of humankind. Sleep well, and dream of green forests and white pyramids, of star-filled skies and sacred cenotes, of a world where humans and gods walked together, where time was sacred and cyclical, where the past lived in the present and the present reached back to honor what came before. Dream the dream of the Maya, and let it carry you gently through this night and into tomorrow, when you will wake renewed, carrying with you the gift of their story, the wisdom of their experience, and the inspiration of their endurance. The story is told. The night is deep. The journey is complete. Sleep now, dear listener, surrounded by peace, held by history, carried forward on the river of time that flows from the ancient Maya through this present moment and onward into futures we cannot yet imagine but which will, in their own way, look back to us as we have looked back to them, seeking connection, seeking meaning, seeking the threads that bind all human experience into one great, eternal, ever-unfolding story. Good night.